Hi, welcome back. I wanted to talk about fault code 5565 today, and that fault is NOx reduction across the SCR brick is insufficient or below acceptable limits. So we're going to take a look at some of the more common reasons that I have seen that fault happen. It's really kind of a bugger if that's the only fault you get. And a few months ago, we had a problem where the driver kept texting and saying, hey, this light's on, this fault's on. Am I going to be stuck? Do I need to stop my run and come in and get another truck? Tell me what to do. The only fault he had was 5565. So we had to decide if he could make it or not. So let's look at some of the things that I thought about when I talked to Jake about what he needed to tell that driver. So this is what, on the left there, that little insert is what Jake got from the driver. And he's going, hey, Jake, I got this in 01. That's his unit number this morning, and the lights are on again. Am I good to run today? And he's got fault or SPN, looks like 4364 FMI 31. But anyway, the fault ended up being 5655 SCR conversion efficiency across the catalyst is too low. So we had to tell him what he should do. And if you noticed on the dash, his OBD light was on and the check engine light was on. So this was about 10 o'clock in the morning, and we knew that if that was staying active, he wasn't going to make it the rest of the day. So Jake told him, if that light stays on active for the next 20 minutes, you need to go back and get another truck. And that would have gave him time. And that's what he ended up doing, is going back and getting another truck. So let's take a look at some of the common reasons that fault can happen when the only fault you've got is 5655 and no other faults to help you. So first of all, 5565 doesn't mean that the DEF system isn't working at all. It means conversion is below acceptable limits. So the system is thinking it's doing something. So one of the things you need to find out at the very beginning, if the driver's there that drives this truck and he brings it into your shop, you need to go and you need to start talking to the driver about how long he idles at night, especially in cold weather. The first thing I tell a driver is, I'm going to ask you some questions. None of these have anything to do with whether you're a good driver or a bad driver, whether you're doing something to the engine that's going to hurt it. It's just questions I have to ask so I don't waste your time and money when I'm trying to figure out what's wrong with this, because the faults don't tell me what I need to know. So I'll ask them, do you idle excessively? I'll get on a creeper and crawl underneath and look and see if there's any joints that have white around them, and that's a sign of DEF. It looks like build up white ice around the joints. I've seen cracked pipes, broken clamps. I've seen the DEF injector, one of the bolts break, and the DEF's coming out of the gasket. And if that injector, if you get a leak and the injector starts over injecting DEF, because the ECM will keep raising the amount of DEF, it's got a feedback loop. It'll keep raising the amount of DEF it sprays in until it gets to a maximum. When it gets to that maximum, it's spraying a lot of DEF in there. And if there's another problem, like a clamp leak or something, and you're idling a lot, that DEF is going to just plug that pipe up in a matter of a couple weeks. And then as the plug pipes up, when it gets about 75% closed, you start logging this 5565. Okay, so that's why you want to know about idling. If they do idle excessively and there's a lot of hours, over 10,000 hours on the engine, and they've never had any service done underneath, I take the decomp pipe down and take a look at it. Pull the DEF injector out, maybe do a flow test on it, see what you got. That's a good place to start. Another thing that can happen, and I've seen this about 8 times, is on the older switchback units or the units where the SCR brick is in a separate can from the DPF and they're connected by a pipe. There's a swirl plate in that pipe. I've seen that swirl plate break and fall out because it's just tack welded in. I've seen that about 8 times and changed 8 pipes. The pipes aren't cheap, but they're not universal. You got to get the part number off it because angle, location, mounting, all that changes depending on the truck that the pipe's in. Okay, so make sure you know the part number. It's stamped in the pipe. It's pretty bad. If you can't see it, get the VIN and call the OEM and ask them, what the part number of the pipe is. So that addresses a cracked. Another thing is a cracked DPF. If they run it a long time, it will allow soot to build up in the decom pipe and the SCR element. A cracked DPF, a lot of times the engine won't regen until it hits the timer. If it's a 2013 or newer, which is a 2350, it might not regen for 90 or 100 hours because that's where the timer's at. So you could have a lot of soot in the SCR element and that'll cause it to be inefficient. A stationary regen or 2 regens in a row will usually fix that problem if that's what the problem is. So you don't have to replace the SCR brick. Next, diluted DEF fluid. I don't see that too often. I've only seen it where a guy put water in an emergency because he was out and he didn't want to go back to the shop with the tank on E. But it catches up to you. Next, an in-range NOx sensor. I've seen NOx sensors, inlets reading hundreds higher than they should. I've seen outlets reading way higher than they should. I've seen inlets reading very low. So if your inlet's supposed to be reading 300 and it's reading 50, and the outlet's supposed to be 90 and it's reading 90, if the inlet's 50, the system's going to believe the NOx sensor and it's going to tell you that the SCR brick's inefficient because there's more NOx going out than coming in because you have a NOx sensor failure. So in that case, you do a stationary regen, log all parameters, and you look at the inlet and outlet NOx. And the outlet NOx should always be lower than the inlet. There's no magic number. Usually it's between 40 parts per million and 500 parts per million lower. On a newer engine, you might see 140 going in and 20 or 30 going out. We talked about the broken swirl plate in a decom pipe. I say pre-unitized after treatment before 2018. I've never seen a swirl plate bad on a unitized after treatment. The unitized is where it's all one big long unit and it's much bigger around. You can have the SCR brick failing. The surface of the element can flake off and then you lose the precious metals that do the work and there's just not enough for it to do the job. So that can happen. You can also have an active fault that doesn't drive a check engine light. So you got to go in and look with a scanner because if that fault, if there's a certain few faults, I think 3616 VGT problems can cause this where it won't dose DEF. And so you need to make sure that that's okay and there's no problem there. I think the reason that 3616 affects it is because it affects EGR, and EGR also affects DEF. Because if the VGT is not in the right place, EGR flow can't be correct. And then frozen DEF that does not thaw due a heater line issue or water valve issue. If the DEF tank's froze, then the system will usually wait about an hour or so before it will try to turn on the DEF system. And then if it can't, because the DEF fluid's frozen for some reason, you're going to end up with this SCR conversion fault. If it can't get fluid in the pump, you should also have a fault for pressure. But make sure that your lines are working and not plugged up with dirt or anything. But again, usually if there's a problem with a line or frozen def, you'll see a fault for pressure. Okay, so in this fella's case, the def injector physically broke. It didn't have any faults on it, but it wouldn't spray def. So he put a new def injector in there, and it fixed the problem. Okay, thanks for joining me on Engine Shop Joe. See you next time.